did some training earlier this week, some follow-up training about regulation, supporting regulation, because regulation is oft reported as a big concern by carers of children and young people. Or I was to do a follow-up session, as I said earlier this week, and before I did it, I looked at what I had shared before, or at least I was reflecting on it, and I think that my brief was what are the next steps, and some people have different interpretations of what are the next steps. I mean, it may be, well, it's all very well what you shared with us, Colby, but what do we do after all of those things don't work? But in my mind, the next steps are often about how do I better communicate the material? How do I make it more accessible? And when I'm developing content, I'm always acutely aware that it's often the case that people who deliver training, or the training that is delivered, tends to be fairly heavy in terms of what people need to know, and less heavy in terms of what people need to do, so to speak. So what are the practical strategies that can be deployed to address an issue like regulation of emotions and behaviours. So when I think about an extension or a follow-up session, I was, rather than just adding more strategies, I was thinking about, well, how do I make this more accessible to my target audience? So if you're happy for me to do so, I'll just share with you something that I came up with that hopefully made things a little bit more accessible to our audience of kinship carers, but not necessarily only relevant to that group of carers. I don't mind a good acronym. I'm not sure that this is a great acronym that is coming up. I have mixed feelings about it, but the way I explained it to the kinship carers that I was speaking to on Monday was, I was thinking about equipping them with knowledge and strategies, and but equipping's way too big an acronym. Yeah. So I was thinking, well, what else would you? What's a briefer or more truncated way of representing equipping them? And I don't know. I just came up with ARM. Now, my ambivalence is because it sounds a bit militaristic, like you're going into battle. Yeah, but the way I explained it was, arms are connected to hands, hands are for doing things. So, maybe that was how I rationalised it. So for the sake of my comfort with it. As it turns out, it didn't really. My audience had a bit of a chuckle at perhaps even at my expense a little bit, and it didn't bother them either way anyway. So ARM was the acronym that I came up with. So basically, this slide is meant to represent, I guess, the normal process, or a process by which children both develop the capacity to regulate their emotions and behaviours, and ultimately be motivated to do that. Yeah, to regulate. So when they're little babies, we assist them with regulation through soothing touch and other sensory soothing activities, rocking them, so cuddling them, rocking them, feeding them, and providing them with oral soothing. We make sure that they're warm when they need to be, and not overly cold. So we maintain body temperature, but we also try to maintain a relatively calm environment, because babies are very sensitive to our emotions and the emotional tone of the environment. So I included self-care in there really just as a dot point, but just about how this is conventional process. So in a conventional nurturing care environment, we self-monitor and manage our own emotional state, and we to ensure that as far as possible that we're best able to look after our little ones. And then as time goes on, and these are not discrete periods, because we continue to assist regulation, for perhaps indefinitely, but the emphasis perhaps changes over time. So over time, and as the children get a little bit older, we tend to move more into co-regulating with them. Interestingly on that, and I don't need to tell you all what co-regulating is, but I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts about this. I was on LinkedIn yesterday or the day before, and I once again saw I want to call them memes, but they're not really memes. They're those when people put up an image and it has some words on there that are meant to be a prompt, I guess, for thinking about the work. When their storm meets your calm, co-regulation occurs. And I did have an urge to put a comment on there saying, when their storm meets your calm, misattunement occurs. But I didn't. But I've seen that. I don't know if other people have seen it. I've seen that so much over the years, and I've got a real problem with it. And you probably heard me talking about not directly about that particular message, but around about in my content about how I think of how co-regulation occurs. From my perspective, co-regulation occurs. Probably one of the visual images that I show people in my training is from the still face experiments. Yeah, and in particular there's a video that I'm sure you've all seen that is widely used with Edtronic talking about the still face experiments. And in that video, there's the mother and an infant, and they go through the protocol. And the thing about that one is that video, and which is fairly easily overlooked. And in fact, when I show that video, I'll often say to people, well, what's the first thing you notice about mum's presentation when she comes out of still face? And many of you have heard me talk about this before. Most people will say, oh, she comes out and she's all happy and she jollies the baby out of being in distress. Yeah. But and then I've actually cut a snippet out, and I encourage people to look more closely. And what you see happen is that prior to mum coming out of still face, she's starting to really blink a lot. The rate at which she's blinking is increases quite significantly before she comes out. And the question is, how is she likely to be thinking just standing, being there in front of her infant, projecting a still face while her infant is getting really distressed? And most people understand that she would be feeling pretty poorly at that point in time. And I think amongst other things, the physical, probably the most obvious physical representation of that is that she starts to blink really rapidly. Like there's a degree of agitation, physiological agitation for mum. And then when she comes out of still face, her first, and it's only momentary, but her first emotional projection is one of distress. Just very momentarily, maybe not for much more than a second or two, mum shows a congruent emotion, and then mum regulates to calm. And that's co-regulation. That's how I think of co-regulation. So the mum as part of that reaction to her baby being in distress, she's feeling distress herself. Her first projected emotion is one of distress. She's not escalating the baby. She's just connecting with the baby in a congruent way. We know that babies and mums fall into sync with each other during interaction. Mum feels distress. She regulates to a calm and then to a happier place, and baby follows with her. And that's co-regulation. From my point of view, it's helping the child back to calm and providing a safe relational environment where the baby can explore and experience a range of emotion without becoming overwhelmed by it. Modelling. So modelling is part of reinforcing regulation, as in children, as they more and more are social learners, and when they observe adults regulating their emotion, they're learning off adults in that way. And we also reinforce through engaging the children in regulatory activity, and regulating activity almost as soon as I was thinking it starts when they sit, and they sit and you're sitting opposite them and you've got blocks and you're trying to put one block on top of another with a little, 6-month-old infant or maybe a little bit older. But even when they're laying on their back and they've got the mobiles over them and they're reaching up to touch them, they actually have to focus on what they're doing to be able to properly and accurately, I guess, touch and interact with those toys. So really from early on in their life, we are providing regulating activity which are activities that involve the child being needing to concentrate or focus on what they're doing in order to be successful in doing it. And of course, as they get older, it's building things, it's riding a bike, it's learning to play a musical instrument, and so on. And then the final piece, and this is the bit that I always, I guess, come up against in my work, is that people want me to teach children skills. Yeah, but my work is very much also about supporting motivation to use them, because you can teach kids skills, strategies, but if they have no motivation to use them, then why do we think they will deploy those strategies? Yeah, so I think the final bit is about maintaining a regulating connection, or a connection whereby the child will regulate themselves in consideration of the relationship that they have with themselves and with other people, but particularly with other people. So that was the ARM acronym. So the second slide was just about how you maintain that regulating connection. So the first slide was, this is the normal process. This is what we need to keep in mind if we want to facilitate or improve a young person's capacity for behavioural and emotional regulation. Again, using the same acronym. You've heard me talk about this before. You're first assessing what's really going on, responding to what's really on, and against the background of implementing CARE, or the AURA acronym, but basically being accessible, understanding, responsive and attuned as reliably and consistently as possible. And of course, this also consistency, you can see is up there. We come up with a word there called calm that sounds like calm with an L. Calm, I'm not sure of the origins. It is a word in the English language, and it means various things. But amongst the meaning of calm, here's another rationalization for you. But amongst the meanings of calm is a person who is really together and focused and successful in their approach to life. So it's not clangingly inconsistent with the idea of calm with an L. So consciously, consistently assist, reinforce and maintain motivation through assessing and responding to the reasons the behaviour and also following that conventional route.